Hi, I'm Beth, and today we're going to be talking about Volume 3 of War and Peace. Welcome to week 3 of the War and Peace vlogs. Finishing volume 2 and reading all of volume 3, I definitely hit a bit of a reading slump. Halfway through volume 2, I was just having trouble focusing, so it felt like I was reading for the sake of trying to make progress. I took about 4 or 5 days away from the book, read some other lighter books, and then I returned to War and Peace and was able to just run with it. I'm ready to share with you my recent thoughts, and I hope that you along with me have read up to this point, or maybe you finished War and Peace long ago and you're just enjoying these vlogs because it reminds you of your time with the book. If you are watching this, you don't care about spoilers because it is a very big book and you're gonna forget about plot points when you read it for yourself. You're still in good hands. At the end of volume 2, Andre falls in love with Natasha. His friend Pierre encourages him that he should propose right away, marry her. She's a great choice because he has been a long friend of the Rostov family, and he's also had some feelings for her himself if he was honest. He encourages his friend Andre to make that move. His father makes him promise to wait for a year before they get married. This causes some issues. While Andre is away and Natasha is just containing that excitement of what the future holds for her, Nikolai, Natasha, and Petya join members of their household to go on a wolf hunt. You can already tell that this is going to be a core memory for these siblings, and by the end of the day, Nikolai and Natasha in particular have gone home with one of their uncles who is less known to the family. He has more of like a secluded lifestyle. He lives in a lodge-like estate that is back in the woods, and he had married someone maybe that his family didn't approve of, but she is very much a homesteader. She's gathered their own honey. They have quite a harvest spread they lay out for their young niece and nephew. So in this scene, they get to experience what it's like to have a humble yet respectable life, and how the partner that you choose plays such a significant role to having that. A pattern that I've been noticing about how Tolstoy composes his story, instead of just a basic simile, he could have said certain movements in war are like a fox hunt. There are people who are positioned to catch those who run out of the crowd, but it's really up to chance. You have to have good scouts. He could have said something like that, and then later there would be a payoff of that scene, something that took place on the battlefield, and we would see it realized. And he does this, but for this example, he uses the full story of what took place that day, what the siblings experienced, and then refers back to it with a simile later on the battlefield when Nikolai is making a decision. Now, unfortunately, over the winter holidays, Natasha grows depressed because Andre hasn't been able to come to visit her. He's had health issues, and then he'd been called back into the war. But she distracts herself with a holiday where all the children dress up like peasants and they tour the neighboring houses and make everyone in their house dress up like peasants. It's kind of like caroling, but also like Halloween. I don't know. They travel from neighbor to neighbor, and it's very much a Christmas tradition. One house, the story is told to the children that if you go out to the barn under a certain moon or at a certain time, you can hear ghosts. And Sonia decides to give that a try. So she leaves the house and she walks to the barn, and she realizes that Nikolai is waiting for her there. They have a moment, they kiss. Nikolai's family really wants him to marry someone who is wealthy so that he can kind of bring them up out of their financial straits, but he wants to propose to Sonia. So they reluctantly give him their permission, and he is engaged to Sonia. Meanwhile, back in Moscow, Boris also is looking for a wife, and he's choosing between Julie and Maria, who are both close friends. They have been pen pals for years. He's not as biased towards someone who would actually make a good partner as he is in securing an estate that he can manage and getting the next level up in the world. That's just kind of how he has been taught and how he has been making advantageous decisions for himself, whether or not they're actually good for him as a person. He ultimately has already decided in his head that it's going to be Julie, and so he proposes to her. And our friend Maria, once again, narrowly escapes a poor marriage. Natasha and Sonia travel to Moscow for a visit with her future in-laws, the old prince and Maria. Natasha gets a rather cold welcome from the two of them because the old prince is increasingly senile. Maria is just a little jealous. She doesn't want her brother to settle down with another person. Everything that she does and says just kind of plays into their pre-existing feelings toward her, and so it's not the best of visits. Our characters pay a visit to the opera, which is one of Tolstoy's favorite settings for societal drama to unfold. That was something that was a key point of Anna Karenina, and it also happens in War and Peace. Natasha is excited about being in the theater for the first time, but she also doesn't quite understand where people's excitement are coming from. It seems like they're just captivated by what's taking place on the stage, whereas she kind of sees through the illusion of it all. But she does get introduced to Helene's brother, Anatole. Just a recap, Helene is married to Pierre.
She's the worst. She's the worst person in the world.
And her brother is really no exception. He also has been married and abandoned his wife and child, and he just kind of plays the field. When he expresses attraction to Natasha, Natasha doesn't really know how to feel. For one thing, her fiancé is far away and she has not seen him a lot, and they have made very tenuous steps forward in their relationship, whereas Anatole is up close and personal, and she just doesn't know how to deal with the emotions that she's experiencing. She begins to fall for him. He makes a plan to elope with her, and fortunately, Sonia discovers their secret just in time. She tells on them to her aunt, so fortunately, their attempt to elope is foiled, but in the process, while Natasha was dealing with all of these feelings and making this careless plan, she also sent a letter to Maria, which broke off her engagement to Andre. Maria and the old prince were very happy about this letter, and Andre was pretty crushed. He decided to bury his feelings for that and just focus on the war. Pierre comes to visit Natasha, who is not in very good health after this whole situation. He comforts her in her despair and reassures her when she says that she feels unworthy. He says that if he were a better man, if he weren't unattractive, he would propose marriage to her. He basically says that he loves her. When Andre later chats with Pierre about the broken engagement, it kind of seems like he's completely dismissed his love for Natasha. Back on the front, there is this confusing conflict between the French and the Russians. They are at certain angles with one another. They didn't plan for that. Remember that they don't know where the enemy is, and so they're making decisions and they have to continue to pivot. Something that Tolstoy talks at length about. History isn't necessarily down to just the decisions of Napoleon, but they're about the decisions of every individual and how those all kind of landslid together into significant moments. It seems like the Russian forces are finally turning and starting to defeat the French. Pierre has been wrestling for a while about whether he should enlist, and up until this point, he's just funded a contingent of people for the army, hasn't actually been there himself, and so he decides to pay a visit to the battlefield during this pivotal moment, has a first taste of what war is really like. The soldiers are amused by this guy who just kind of strides up and down the line and looks at what's happening, but he doesn't have any training to actually help. They give him a nickname, which I think is like an observer or a father or a tourist. But then things start to really heat up. The people that he was laughing with and talking with are killed, and he's pretty shocked by that experience. Tolstoy makes some good comparisons between good leadership and bad leadership. He talks about Napoleon's interactions and his intent and how his successes can't really just be accredited to him as a person. But we also see General Kutuzov, who listens more to how someone asks a question rather than what is said. People dismissed him because it seemed like he was sleeping or not paying attention when someone would tell him something important, but he really just is a lazy genius, I would say. Doesn't pay attention to the things that don't matter. He pays attention to the people who are asking him for things, and then he makes a decision based on that. The thing that they want to do might not have that great of an impact in the long run. Smart way to like conserve your energy as a leader and actually determine like what is the best use of your time. Maria and the old prince are still in Moscow, and they've been warned that they should probably leave the city because the war is creeping ever closer. Napoleon is going to be invading the city soon, and they make plans to leave, but the prince falls ill and it seems like he's on his deathbed. Maria has mixed feelings about that. On one hand, she feels like her freedom could be at hand. Maybe her life is going to open up from here on out. When he does actually die, his body after he dies is more of a picture of the way that he treated her when he was alive, but she rejects that image of him. She only remembers his last words to her, which were kind of the only nice and loving things that he said to her in the book so far. But they had that one moment before he died, and she's clinging to that. Now Maria just needs to get out of the city, and the city that they're in is starting to feel the effects of being close to the front. Their peasants conspire to steal the wagons that Maria and her people were going to use to get out of the city. Who should arrive at just the right moment? Nikolai, who has never met Maria, but he has heard of her. Everyone is connected in this novel. Nikolai arrives just in time. He beats up some of the townspeople. He rebukes the mayor for getting in the way, and he escorts Maria safely out of the village. Maria is feeling some insta-love. She thinks she might be in love, and Nikolai actually, because he had such a positive interaction with her, he got to be the hero, he also has some feelings. He resents those feelings because he's already engaged to Sonia. During a kind of surreal moment of calm, Andre sees this whistling explosive touch down near him, and it's just spinning and spewing off smoke, and he doesn't register that it's real. It goes off and he's severely injured. So he's taken to a medical tent, and it's just chaos in there. There's a lot of fast and dirty surgery taking place, and near his bed there is a man who has had his leg amputated. And that man he recognizes as Anatole Kuroyin, the man who tried to seduce his fiancée away from him. He feels like he is near death, and he's putting everything into context. He's moved to compassion, and he even feels love for this man who before had been his sworn enemy, and he had planned, if he ever saw him in person, to fight him or kill him or duel with him. He sees him in this setting, and he's able to forgive this guy. The next piece is interesting because Pierre receives word that Andre has died, and as the reader, we're kind of in shock because Tolstoy didn't show us that. Oh, maybe he is dead. Maybe that's not just a rumor. Maybe he is dead. And we didn't find out what the truth was for about 25 pages. So that was a little brutal. Back in Moscow, despite the governor's propaganda, which is sent out daily, The rumors are that Napoleon will be invading Moscow soon. Those who can should pack up and leave, must do so swiftly. We've already had some characters who have made it out, but Natasha and her family at the Rostov estate are still in the process of packing. Natasha shows off her packing skills. She's able to organize their best rugs and dishes into 2 large crates. When wounded men from the battlefield start arriving on the street with no place to go, Natasha is moved and she wants to offer them a place to stay. So she runs out and invites them into the home. Then one of the servants reminds her that she should probably ask her parents first before they continue to do that. So she does, and they're in such a flurry of packing and stress that they just kind of approve that. The family has hoped to leave during the night. Unfortunately, their packing wasn't complete and they fall asleep in the middle of all of that, which is a good thing because it means that they're still there when Prince Andrei is carried into their house. The next morning, Natasha convinces her parents leave more behind so that they can use the carts to transport the wounded soldiers. At this point, her family hasn't told her that one of the wounded men in their house is Prince Andrei. On the way out of the city, Natasha sees Pierre walking on the street with a stranger. He's in some strange clothing. She calls out to him and they have a brief exchange through the carriage window. She invites them to come along with them and he almost considers it, but then he thinks better of it. He has plans of his own and he needs to stay in Moscow to accomplish them. We have another example, a picture of something that is going to take place. In this case, he's talking about how an abandoned beehive looks when most of the colony has swarmed elsewhere. It's a good time to remember that Tolstoy was a farmer, he was a beekeeper, and so he loves these types of details. You might think, why wasn't this just a simile? Because he does say something like that, like something that's short and to the point, but then he goes into detail about how there are robber bees, there are dead corpses, there are things that are deteriorating, like everything has changed. Then when you read the part about what is taking place in the city of Moscow, most of the population has left, but there's still kind of like a dull sound that you can tell it's not completely empty there. And things start to catch on fire because people are not at home tending to their houses. People start to loot and raid and they're more prone to violence because there's so much insecurity and fear in the atmosphere. And you think about what he said about the beehive as you're reading about what Moscow looks like, which is really cool. Almost to the end of volume 3, Natasha and her family have safely made it to their next location and they decide to tell her that Andrei is in the house, but they tell her that she's forbidden from seeing him. I think part of that is they don't want to disturb him, but they also don't want their daughter to be disturbed again. When she was going through everything with Anatole and breaking off her engagement with Andrei, she was in some pretty bad straits for a while. She was quite sick. I think they're trying to protect her and kind of protect him, but she waits until everyone has fallen asleep and she sneaks to his room and he is just waking up from a feverish dream to find her there in the room, standing in the doorway. This is such a great scene. She apologizes for breaking off their engagement, for betraying him and her feelings for Anatole, and he says that he forgives her and that he loves her even more. Now we get to find out what the heck Pierre is up to. He went to the home of his mentor, which has since been abandoned, and his friend's father is not in good mental health and he just kind of drinks a lot and roams the halls of this house. But otherwise it's pretty quiet. It has a nice library. Pierre goes to the library with the pretense of looking over his friend's documents. He makes the decision that he individually needs to go and kill Napoleon. His plans are interrupted when French officers arrive at the house. The mentally ill man tries to shoot one of the soldiers, and Pierre intervenes and he takes the gun away from him. So Pierre accidentally saves the captain's life and he makes an accidental friend. When he kind of shakes that off and leaves a little bit later, runs into a situation where a family has a missing child. Pierre takes off to go look for the child. On the way back to the family, after successfully finding her, he runs into a situation where some French soldiers are harassing a small family. He intervenes and he's arrested. So he's very much in hero complex mode. He wants to be the person that does the right thing, and he's kind of getting an adrenaline high doing these dangerous things. Finally, all of that is kind of cut off because he's arrested and taken away. That's the end of volume 3. That was a lot. A lot happened. Here are the questions that I have going into volume 4. So far, none of our main characters, at least not the ones that we've followed the most closely, have died. I'm wondering if that's going to change in this final volume. I did watch the BBC One adaptation that I keep using clips from, but I don't remember all the details. So that has not spoiled my reading experience for this by any means. I don't remember whether Nikolai will end up with Marya or Sonia. So that's something that I'm curious about. I also want to know, how is Pierre going to just barely make it out of this new scrape, because that's just what his character does. He finds himself in dangerous situations and he just barely makes it out alive. I want to know what happens next. If you've been reading a big book this summer, are you close to the finish line? I feel like once you get to the halfway point, it's kind of all downhill from there. Every little section of pages feels way longer than it actually is. Next week, I will be finishing this big book. I'm excited to be back with you to share my final thoughts. If you've been watching this far, let me know what your favorite beats of the story have been, and anything that you were reminded of from your time reading the book, or things that maybe make you nervous or excited about reading the book for the first time. And I will see you in another video soon.